purpose of the Flick-Reedy Education Enterprises is to promote individual moral responsibility through education. How do we do this? We study and discuss the interrelationships of history, philosophy, social studies, and economics. We do not dictate. We do not make statements as to what we think you should or should not do. We do not unduly burden this program with footnotes, references, or complete documentation. However, we do give sufficient data to bring this discussion into proper focus. We invite you to delve further into the necessary historical and statistical data to develop a deeper understanding of truth and a keener sense of individual moral responsibility.
Let us continue our talk about communism's success. Encouraged by the fact that their naked aggression in Korea had not cost the communists anything but the lives of North Korean and Chinese soldiers, who were expendable anyway because of critical food shortages in China, the communists began to move out into other areas of Asia. In Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader, first secured an agreement with the French, only to break that agreement several months later and plunge the French into a war in which the French were finally defeated. As we know today, that wasn't the end of the trouble in Vietnam. The whole of Southeast Asia was a trouble spot. Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, and Indonesia. Communist probes into the Middle East oil-rich lands have caused continual ferment there. Nor have the other continents been neglected by the communists. Communist influence in the Congo, as well as other African nations, has been well documented. South America and Central America have received their share of attention from the communists. For the most part, these poor, penniless people have been but pawns in the game of communist conquest. But the situation that comes closest to home is Cuba, 90 miles from our shores. I know of no one who felt that Batista was the kind of leader that they would have selected for Cuba or perhaps anywhere else. But who is this person, Fidel Castro? Early in the Cuban struggle, Castro had but a handful of men hiding out in the mountainous area of Cuba. A nuisance perhaps, but hardly a threat to the non-communist Cuban government under Batista. What was to happen next was a miracle that would have done credit to the best of the Madison Avenue public relation and advertising agencies. All of a sudden, Fidel Castro was launched into the headlines. The red carpet was thrown out for him. No less a newspaper than the New York Times described him as the most romantic figure to arise in Cuba since Jose Muerte, hero of Cuba's War of Independence. A noted TV personality presented Castro to his nationwide audience saying,
"The people of the United States have a great admiration for you and your men, because you are in the true tradition of George Washington."
Later, he retracted that opinion. I suspect he was hardly to blame, because in such a brief time our eyes and ears were flooded with stories glorifying Fidel Castro. Many, many people were taken in by these phony stories. It could have happened to most of us. His error was more public, hence more noticeable. Several church-published periodicals of various denominations went so far out on the limb as to state that, despite what you may have read, the Cuban rebels are not communists. And in another, Castro was portrayed as a simple agrarian reformer, the same type of portrayal as was made for Mao Zedong of Red China. Then what happened? The same as with China. A bill was introduced in our Congress to put an arms embargo against the non-communist government of Cuba, while at the same time, Castro was having no difficulty getting plenty of arms and money from communist sources. It wasn't until after his victory that Castro publicly stated,
"I have been a communist from the very start."
At least, that ended all speculation about the matter. Was everybody asleep? No, there were responsible people in our government who had the facts and tried hard to tell them. In our government, as in our homes, America liked the idea of another George Washington in a nearby country. It was sort of self-flattering. So all of us, or almost all of us, bought it hook, line, and sinker. The history of the Russian missiles in Cuba and the confrontation with Russia about them is still recent enough that we need not go into detail here. Suffice to say that Russia at first denied their presence. As we indicated earlier, lies and deceit are quite all right if they advance the cause of communism. To what extent the Russians actually removed the missiles from Cuba, or how many they have there right now, is for most of us Americans still rather cloudy. Perhaps a case could be made for saying that it's a secret matter that we don't have the right to know about. I leave the question to you. Are there, or have there been communists right in our own government? Perhaps. I certainly don't know. except for those that either are caught or defect before they are caught. It seems to me that if we citizens have facts, we should supply them to proper authorities, but otherwise we should be confident that our most capable Federal Bureau of Investigation, plus our congressional investigation committees, will do a good job for all of us. And further, we should know that almost all the people in our government are good, loyal Americans. Let's not make the mistake of condemning all or many of them just because a few of them turned out to be communist agents. This somewhat lengthy review of history, right up to the present, was to help us put communism in perspective, to be able to see things in a pattern which separation in time and place may have left fuzzy. If it is a threat to our freedom, we must have a practical, working understanding of what it is. What kinds of ideas should we associate with the communist movement? Well, the word movement includes the idea of something moving, of motion towards some goal or objective. Certainly history has well demonstrated that communism is moving. Let's examine the related parts of the communist movement. We can divide the movement into three main parts and label the first part philosophy, for surely communism has a philosophy, a special outlook on life. Its philosophy comes from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, revealed to us by their book, The Communist Manifesto. In order to put the philosophy into action, strategy, tactics, and plans were devised. Lenin, for the most part, had established those prior to his death in 1924, and they have been fairly faithfully carried on ever since by his successors, primarily Stalin and Khrushchev. But a philosophy, even with strategy and tactics, is still incomplete. The second part of the communist movement is physical resources. There has got to be a land base and various other materials from which and with which to launch a philosophy. As history has indicated, communism obtained its original physical resources in 1917, when it got control of Russia. Since that time, their base of physical resources has increased considerably by the control of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, China, and all the other areas mentioned in our historical review. People make up the remaining one-third of the communist movement, for obviously no philosophy, even coupled with physical resources, is going to move unless it includes the all-important factor, people. What different kinds of people do they have? First of all, they have their very, very select inner circle of party leaders. They really run the show. Next, they have people who belong to the Communist Party, below the level of the leaders, who fill the lesser positions of authority, but who are completely dominated and directed by the leaders. We will call these the functionaries. But there are other people, or you see only about 5% of all the people in Russia are Communist Party members. Many others would like to be members and are trying to gain admission. They work hard for the party. We will call them activists. Then there are communists outside of Russia, all over the world. Many of them are card-carrying members of the Communist Party. Others who work for them but are not actual members are called fellow travelers. Still further from party members and even fellow travelers are those who assist the communists on only certain projects at certain times. They have no influence in the party. The communists merely use them. Sometimes this fringe group is called pinks. We might think of these persons as dupes because they really have been fooled one way or another into helping the communists. Almost every country in the world has its share of this kind. But how about all the rest of the millions and millions of people behind the iron and bamboo curtains who are not party members, who may not even want to be? In short, how about the masses? Well, now, that is a very interesting question, and the communists have given us the answer. They consider the masses not as people, but as part of their physical resources, expendable in the same manner as they would expend wood, coal, iron ore, and other materials. So, we have to put the masses over in the physical resources section of the communist movement. This basically describes the elements that make up the communist movement. And move it certainly has, growing faster than any other movement known in history. If you conclude that communism is a threat to our freedom, and if you want to combat it, you must be prepared to combat all three parts of the movement. Fighting only one or two of the parts will not accomplish your objective. The appeal of communism is not felt as strongly in America as it is in lands whose people are either extremely wealthy or extremely poor. We are a nation of the middle class. In America, even the humblest citizen by his own efforts can rise to great heights. Abraham Lincoln began life in a log cabin. George Washington Carver was a Negro born in slavery. One became the President of the United States, the other, one of our greatest agricultural chemists. Every person who serves the communist movement has somehow been convinced or has been fooled into accepting all or part of the Marxist philosophy. Just how different minds have been taken in varies greatly. People frequently have different reasons for serving any cause. The communists claim that under communism, there will be the eventual destruction of the political authority of the state. Man will become master of his own social organization. According to their master plan, all poverty will be eliminated and there will be developed a complete brotherhood among men. There will be no government over the individual because there will be no need for one. Each will produce according to his ability, and each will take from production according to his needs. This is all very nice, very idealistic. But also, it is very unrealistic. With about half a century of communist rule by force in Russia, it has not produced a classless society. The evidence shows there is a very rigid class system in their society. The appeal of communism is twofold. One is rather well known, the other almost unknown. One aspect is to appeal to the poor, the malcontent, the underprivileged. The other aspect appeals to the wealthy, the intellectually superior, and finally, the idealistic reformers. To the hungry, malcontent, underprivileged, and poor of the earth, and they are legion, the apostles of communism say,
Follow me, and I will build a new world for you and your children. It will be a world from which hunger and cold are banished forever. A world in which war and pestilence are only bad memories. A world without exploitation of man by man, without racial animosity. It will be a world of peace, of culture and intellect, a world of brotherhood and justice.
Now, you'll have to admit that's quite a package. You can certainly see how that would have tremendous appeal to the poor, the hungry, underprivileged, and malcontent. But how about the appeal to the other group? What can they say to them? Here's the other part that is used, not to captivate the poor, but to seduce the rich, not to enlighten the ignorant, but to enlist the educated, not to bribe the cynical, but to ensnare the idealistic. Here is that promise. Note it carefully.
We are working to create a new society. There will be the emergence of a finer mankind. Human nature itself is to be transformed into something infinitely nobler and finer and more beautiful. Mankind is to be redeemed from vice, depravity, and sin in all their forms.
Anyone who has felt the thrill of contributing to humanity might be touched by this appeal. The doctor who saves a life, the minister who leads to great spiritual heights, the educator who guides young minds to greatness, the lawyer who saves a poor and innocent man from unjust punishment. They all know the thrill of helping stumbling man. And each time that you feel the pangs of remorse in viewing slums, squalor, disease, or any of the woes of the unfortunate, you too can realize the pull of the promise of a reformed and refined world. Communism makes the promise to cure all the evils of the world. Its plan is not to reform one drunkard, but to eliminate all drunkenness, all crime, all vice, and everything that spoils and mars man from what he should be. Surely this appeal finds a soft spot in all our hearts. But despite this idealistic appeal, history indicates that the ones most likely to get to the top of the Communist Party are those who have been characterized by a lust for power, personal power. And many have that lust without even realizing it themselves. According to the record, personal power is the grand prize which communism has offered to a select few. Ask yourself, hasn't it been the shrewd and ruthless personal power seekers who have become the party bosses, controlling and directing the communist movement? Would you have selected Joe Stalin or Nikita Khrushchev to be social workers and helping the poor and underprivileged? The appeals of communism are many-sided, but they are false appeals. Still, these appeals are dangerous because, in the words of Hitler's propaganda minister, Hermann Goebbels,
If you tell a lie big enough, often enough, and loud enough, a great many people will come to believe it.